Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Living Ascension. So today, we're talking about, I don't even know, how did we even get into that conversation? Oh, I know. We go through this whole thing, right? And what is one of the things that hold us back the most? It's especially when we want to step into something that's like our passion or what we're doing. It's like, there's always the imposter syndrome, right?
Right.
And what is the imposter syndrome? The imposter syndrome is I'm pretending to be something I don't. And what I'm pretending to be is an authority in something that I don't believe I'm really legitimized to be an authority in. Right. Essentially. And we get into this whole conversation because we talk about that a lot. We talk about validation. Yes.
Right. Not being heard. That's been a big one over the weekend.
Yeah. So not being heard, not being acknowledged too, right?
And then not being utilized. The information not being utilized, even though it's helpful.
Right. And so, we were talking about that. And it's like, of course, at the end of the day, all right. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? What people think of you, because it's none of your business, because it's where they are, right, on their journey. Right. However, while we are, and this is what brought on this whole conversation, while we're in this, interaction that we created of this reality, it's like, well, then what do we do? What do we do with that? If we're to make a living or, how do we even play our note in the symphony, right? Because our note is our legitimacy, right? Our existence is our legitimacy. We've talked about that before, right? However, truly in our world and our culture, right? You ask 100 different people what an authority is, and you'll get 100 different answers, right?
Right. And a lot of times, especially right now, it's defined through so many 3D terms. Like it's the trauma you've been through or the lessons you've learned. And it becomes
or it's gender bias, right? Oh, because it's a man, the man knows better, because
it's your education.
The woman knows better, and what's your education level, right? Like what piece of paper do you have? How many initials do you have after your name?
Exactly. What have you paid for to legitimize yourself with?
Right. And so it's really funny because I have seen in the consciousness community, right, a whole ocean of people over the past 10 years who've gone and gotten a PhD in metaphysics or whatever, so they could call themselves doctors, so people would take them as an authority. When really what they've done, most of the colleges they've gone to are basic colleges that don't even fall under the accreditation thing or whatever, right? Within which is what the country considers authority or legitimate, right? But you still have that piece of paper that says you're a doctor, so you can still use it, and all this kind of stuff. So it's so I can say you're a doctor. Go ahead, you're a doctor.
Right. Well, or I've written a book on that.
Right.
Doesn't mean that there's fact or truth contained within the book, within the volume.
And as soon as people say, think the word author is the beginning of authority, right? So you think about that, and it's so we give all these definitions to what authority is, to what and behind that is what's legitimacy and what's valid. So we feel like if we don't hold up to the standards, or we're made to feel like, right, or we're it's what's imparted on us is if you don't hold up to the standards of society or of those around you or of your peers, of your family, of whatever, then you are not legitimate. For example, I know somebody who really thinks, I know so many families where it's there's so many there's so much friction, right? Because one of the parents, say, is in one case in the medical field, right? So therefore it is imparted that all the kids, if they're not in the medical field, they are not legitimate, like to be productive in society, right?
Right.
And or and there's and it's like, or there's another one that's like high tech, and it's like, well, if you're not in computers, well then yeah, it's not a legitimate kind of profession. So like we think about that, like, and like that's what we like, and what is that? That's equating to our value, right? How we externally value ourselves, and we believe we need to value ourselves in society as part of this creation, and instead of just our existence being the validation, just our being here. And it's like, well, so what is authority anyway? Like, what is it? It's really an ego-driven definition. There's no way we can come through it, like that's not ego-driven. Like,
Well, and it also stems from I know more than you, which then puts in hierarchy,
mhm.
which says, I'm better than you in these particular circumstances,
Well, that's what
or
we
I'm more valuable than you in these particular
well,
circumstances.
and that's where we let the ego come in, right? Because here's the
Right.
thing. We are all special, right? Which of course that makes none of us special, but all of us are special. But because of our embodiment, because of what we came here to do, because of what we came here to be, what we came here to be as the note in the symphony, right?
Mhm.
And so, like there's that term like that gets thrown around today, excuse me, that says, you have a PhD in your life, which is true because you are nothing but you are authority in nothing but your life, because it's
Right.
your life, right?
No one else has experienced and gleaned from a set of circumstances like you have.
Right. So then what do we do with that? Like how do we navigate through that? Because we were talking about that, because it's like, okay, we have so many different hierarchies, so many different layers and levels, and of, okay, in this community you're an authority if this, right?
Right.
In this community you're an authority if you have this piece of paper, or if you have this profession, right? Which, and it doesn't make somebody not an authority, but it also puts this hierarchy in place, right? That says, well, they
Well,
know more automatically.
and another factor to that is you have this amount of money, so you must be an authority.
Right. Right. Or you've had this amount of success, whatever that looks
Right,
like,
right,
right?
right.
Well, that's the whole, you wrote a book, so you must be an authority, right?
Exactly, exactly.
And so the thing is, it's not that we're taking away from that. It's that it's how do we balance that I can express myself fully in what I came here to be, what flower I came here to be, or what note I came here to be the authority in that, have my PhD in that experience, right? And at the same time, acknowledge and embrace that everybody's got their own version of that for their own experience, right?
Right,
Without
right.
without taking away, because here's the thing. The other thing that we get stuck on is what somebody was like 10 years ago, right?
Oh, right, right.
Or 20 years ago, right? I mean, you have people who talk about, say, doctors, right? So then there's a doctor, like, they're like a doctor that was became a doctor in the 70s, right? They're
Mhm.
still practicing today. Are they up to date? Do you know? Are they taking current like courses, like things like that? Are they taking current courses? Do they know what's like current in how things are progressing? Because our bodies are not the same as they were 70, 50 years ago.
Well, they do have continuing education courses, and they to upkeep their license, but they find that the majority of their progressiveness, so to speak, comes from external forces like drug reps
Mhm.
and journals. So if things don't make it through that filter, they don't have that knowledge.
Right.
that expertise.
Right. Right. And if it's the way the whole community, that community is going, they don't really look to, and so the thing is, we've been taught that if somebody's an authority on something, that they know more than you,
Right.
period.
Right.
Regardless
And
of
really, what I've been discovering, particularly this weekend, which was a very challenging weekend for me, is that unless something stems from my authenticity, my authentic resonance, it becomes a struggle. And I equate that back to that imposter syndrome, that I find that that's something that isn't authentic to me. So that really is something I'm not an authority on.
right. Right. But then a lot of times we feel like we have to pretend we are. Right. Or
Right.
on the other end, then we feel like, oh, well, I do know this. Like, I know this as much as my heart beats, but I don't have, a piece of paper. I haven't written a book on it. I have blah, blah, blah. That's the other imposter syndrome, because of what everybody else around you is telling you, you are not an authority.
Right. Right.
And I've seen so many things that, I saw something that sort of rubbed me the wrong way a couple of weeks, within the last couple of weeks. It was some commentary I was watching, or something that was like, oh, well, forget about the people who say they have a PhD in their lives, like, who's really gotten the education. And I was like, what?
Right.
But that's what we believe. That's what, people say, oh, that's just frou-frou. That's like blah, blah, blah. But you actually went to school to do that, And the thing is, it's not dissing that either, but there's a billion different ways to school. There's a billion different, and that, like, our
Right.
entire, and that's the whole, like, your life is your PhD, because your life is your school, how you live it and what you have to know. Like, people, you can't learn certain things out of, say, a textbook, or things are changing so fast that, like, if you got to wait for it to catch up with a system, right, to legitimize you in a, value and externally value-based society, well, then you're just never going to go anyplace. It's always going to be, you're going to stop yourself and then just become a bubble. Close that bubble.
Right. Which, we talked about that last week, is that we have a tendency to, when things don't flow like we have the expectation that they will, and that we run into conflict and questioning, that we tend to retreat to that bubble, which is what we talked about last week.
Right, because it's
That-
like this, that was, like, sitting at a table, like, and there are different factors, right? So, like in some cases, generally somebody, oh, because they're of their age, right, or their gender, they automatically are accepted as an authority, like, because they just sort of project themselves. They don't have to have any bit of any kind of legitimacy, the way they project themselves, right? And then
Right.
the same, somebody sitting next to them can project themselves the same way and not be taken the same way, because they're a different gender, they're different age, or whatever, different presentation. And that's what's fascinating to me. Is like, so what is that? I laugh, right? Because
Right.
one of the examples that I give, right? And this wasn't really what set up the conversation, but this is an example that I give all the time. Is my husband is the master at just spewing off stuff off the top of his head, even if you don't know what the hell he's talking about, right? And it comes across as fact. In fact,
Right.
to the level that my kids as adults now have now adopted the term, is that a dad fact? Because they've learned to catch him. Like, he'll just say something like, it's a fact. And because of his tone, people accept it as fact.
Right.
And it can be
Right.
completely BS. And it would, something over the years that has made me nuts, because I'm like, oh my God, that was total BS. That was total BS. So the funny thing is, my kids is adult now, because they're funny, because they're very analytical about stuff or whatever, but they're like, they've heard me over years call him on stuff. So now they know, like, when he gets a certain tone, they're like, they'll be quiet for a second. They'll go, so is that a dad fact? I think we need to look that up.
Right. Right.
Where to the internet, because if it's on the internet, it must be true, which is the
Right.
other authority, right? But you know, it's funny because but there are people that, I mean, do that, and sometimes it's just gender, and sometimes it's like, you know, like how many times I've heard, um, you know, husband and wives, like a wife and a husband could be having a conversation or whatever, and it's like, oh well, one says it within the conversation within the two of them, right? And
Right.
and it's like, oh yeah, right. And then, and it's usually, and a lot of times it does tend to be the husband and the wife, or it's the husband and the wife says something, the husband's like, yeah. Then he goes out and some, like, one of his friends says the same exact thing, and he comes home and he's like, oh my God, this was like such great information and blah, blah, blah. I can't
Did
tell you
you
how many times,
know?
did you know? And I can't, that makes me nuts. Right. And it's like, so where do we get this? That was where we started, you know, you and I started looking at this. It's like, where do we
Right.
get the, like, legitimacy? Is it an energy? Is it a tone? Is it, you know, like, is it, why do we give credit to somebody or something more than we would give ourselves? Because at the end of the day, so at the end of the day, why is it even important, right? Why do you care, right? And that's where
Right.
we retreat into the bubble. Because then I said, you know, there was a conversation that I was having, and this was exactly what happened with my husband. It was something that I've said to him many times, and he would talk to a friend who said they read an article and, oh, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden that was legitimate. And I was like, how many times have I sent you articles on this? Like, how many times have I talked about the same thing? And I got pretty offended. And it's in my area of, sort of my area of expertise, you know? So it's like, well, okay, but why did that trigger me? Right. Because like, and it's like, well, why do we then are looking for external validation?
Right. And I really think it all comes back to the inside, because your external is always a reflection of the internal.
Right.
So the legitimacy comes for yourself, which I
Mhm.
think that's the place to start, is
Right.
where do I legitimize myself? How do I legitimize myself? And then that is then reflected outwardly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that, where looking at how I view myself, how I value myself, where I nourish myself. Because if I
Mhm.
nourish myself in all the external legitimacies, you're neglecting the internal legitimacies.
Right. But then, you know, then the question is, right. So the question is, if everything outside of you, right, then reflects what's inside of you, then if you're not being validated or considered an authority, then obviously there's something inside of you that doesn't consider that either. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so that's, so then I'm like going, but then everything, you know, my conscience is like, nope, because but I must be missing something. Or we feel like we have, I mean, that's the whole thing is, so what it comes down to is, as we always get to, is one of our 7 essences from our, at least, right, which is that
Right.
A, self-responsibility, right? B, guidance. C, trust. Knowing.
Forgiveness.
Yeah, forgiveness, right? But number 1 is, at the end of the day, nobody knows the answers for you except for you,
Right.
right? And
And I'm
so,
worthy. I'm worthy to be legitimate.
right, all right, worthiness too, right? So there was 5 of them right off the top of our heads, right?
Right.
Of course, and self-love, because once you get to self-love, you know that you have all the answers anyway. So that's 6. So what do we miss? Oh, the shadow. The shadow is
Which definitely plays a part.
absolutely, because it's all the want, need, whatever. Yeah. So there, we hit on all 7. but the key is, like, how do we, I see how the yawn. How do we get to, you know, because the thing that I've been toying with, in all honesty, is, do I even consider, going forward doing this because anymore, right?
Right.
Because there's so many voices screaming that they're the authority, right? And really, what I am an authority on is how to tap into your own authority within
Right.
yourself.
Right. Right. Well, and it's how to teach you to be a master of yourself.
Right.
And that, there's so many mastery classes out there, and you master this, and
Right.
you master this, and you master this, and those are all externals. And it's
Right.
like, until you master yourself, you don't stand a chance of finding that legitimacy internally.
Right. And the legitimacy is that authentic resonance that we've been talking about for the last several months, right?
Right.
And because I find that when I allow myself to just sit in that, right, that it's not just one thing that comes out that flows really well. It's like everything I do just flows well. And there's not one thing that I lean toward in like authority. It's just everything I do comes out well or works well or
Right.
whatever, because I'm in my authentic resonance. So that imparts into all the doing, right? Which is what we've been talking about, the doing from the being versus the being from the doing.
Right.
So,
Well, and with everything shifting and things that used to work don't work anymore. That's the bottom line.
yep,
Things that used to flow don't flow anymore. And it, when you back up and look at it from that place of authentic resonance, is the wellspring of that flow whole? Is that wellspring available? Because if you're manipulating and managing only externally, it's an illusion.
right,
And once that flow then is from the authentic resonance, it changes everything. It changes the dynamic, it changes the sustainability, because you're not artificially holding something in place.
right,
And then that's where the authority comes from.
right,
And we're not used to looking at it that way. We're not used to judging others that way.
well, and it makes it so much feel, well, the thing is, when we do that and we come into that resonance and we come into that internal authority, right, on me, like, and everything that I do from being,
Right.
it's funny because the ego then gets lost, because the ego goes, well, because I want to say what I am, right, and I'm everything that I choose
Right.
to be,
Right.
right, and then the
Well,
ego goes, no, no,
and
no,
the
no,
ego
because
has
that's
no identity in that,
right, right,
or believes that it doesn't.
right. So that's the question to sort of put out there today, and let's sit with that on which is, what is that? What does authority mean to you?
Right. Right.
What does authority mean to you? Put that in the comments, put that in the chat, even when you're watching this, not live. Like, what is authority to you? Are you an authority? Are you the authority for you? Because we say it, but we don't mean it most of the time, because we'll say, oh yeah, 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 but then, the doctor says this, or this person says this, or, this whatever expert says this, and then we start questioning our own guidance, right? When we get
Right.
into that space of like, I know my guidance, but the thing is, are you an authority on your own guidance? Are you an authority on listening to your own voice? Because that's what's going to be the true authority, because that sees the whole picture,
Right.
right?
And when you look at your authority world, where do you give your power away by deeming someone else's authority over what you know to be true for you?
Mm-hmm.
And where do you where do you support authority that is so unrelated to you and unconnected in the attempt to create something in you that doesn't resonate?
Right. Right. You know, the question I've had is, how do we even have conversations anymore? It's just a lot. There's a lot, and I'm still sitting on it. There's still a lot that I feel like, you know, you think about it, and this is like, we can go in 20 different directions with this, but it's like we
Right.
get stuck in it in consciousness. We get stuck in it in the whole spiritual world. We talk about, oh, who did you learn this from? Right.
Right.
Making that more or less legitimate. Like, you know, they talk about, what do they call that? I can't think of the word. When it's like, well, did you, have you studied under the original, like, creator of
Right.
it?
Right.
Like, what's your lineage? Yeah. Lineage in terms of learning something versus, which is funny because, I brought in Trinity Energy Progression, right? Brought that in, started that 11 years ago. And what's interesting is people are stuck in, instead of something that's new, and I mean, like, and we have quite a community or whatever, but that have taken it and whatever, but it's like you have things like, Reiki, who like, oh, well, did you study it under this lineage or that? It's like, but the thing is, at the end of the day, whether it's Reiki or Trinity or archangelic light or, theta healing or shamanic healing, or it
Quantum
doesn't
touch.
matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It's all divine energy. It's all from the same place. It's just different facets through different
Right.
filters. And it all gets to the same place, same thing, right? And that was the whole thing, the whole effort with Trinity, is like getting beyond the labels to just accessing divine consciousness, accessing the quantum field, whatever you want to call it, the quantum field, the universe, blah, blah, blah. But we get so stuck in, well, how do we do that? How did you do that? And who, like, who'd you learn this from? And who did you learn that from? And when people says, so it's funny, like people say things like, oh, well, I channeled this from this ascended master, right? Or automatically they're given authority because of that, versus just saying, well, it just came into me myself. And like, I can't tell you how much I had to,
Right.
like, over explain and over educate and stuff, and going through bringing that in 11 years ago. But it's like, so like, it's funny because we have it in all facets. So we are not divorced of it in the spiritual community at all, because we just have perpetuated it in a different fashion. So the thing is, and then I look at people who are really nervous. They want to do like professional practitioner work, but they're nervous about their own legitimacy. And I'm like, well, you know what you're doing. Like, I remember I had for a while, I did an open energy healing, like, meetup that I was just like, okay, or meditation energy share. That's what it was. It was a meditation / energy share. And I was like, everybody's invited. So it wasn't Reiki, it wasn't Trinity, it wasn't like one specific kind of practice. It was anybody who has, or you didn't even have to be trained in it. All you have to do is have interest in it and tapping into, like that quantum field energy or whatever, and, getting into meditation. And so that lasted for like 3 months, and it was fabulous. The first couple of times that it happened, it was fabulous, because I had people of all different kinds of practices show up in class. In fact, I had several people who just were like, well, I've never had any training, but I've been pulling in this energy that's been doing some fabulous stuff, to help me, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, great. And then after like the third time, I had people that started saying, oh yeah, I just feel really uncomfortable working with people who aren't trained the way I am.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's mirrored out into the world right now.
Yeah. Right. And that limits us, though. Instead of saying, I think it's fabulous working with people of all different kinds of backgrounds, because you get different flavors of how it comes in and how it works, and, and all that kind of stuff. And I have confidence in my own authority on how I manage my own energy. So if it doesn't serve me, it's just not going to come in front of me, or it's not going to harm me in any way. It's just going to be there. Right.
Right.
Instead of people going, oh, well, I'm just, I have to put up all this kind of protection. And I don't know if they don't know, like, and this is what you get all this stuff is like, I don't know if they know their protection. We go through all this all the time.
Right.
And the key is to recognize that that's an authority thing in itself. Right.
True. Very true. Yeah.
And so it's like all this kind of stuff, we get stuck in all of these things because like in the non-spiritual community, we talk about what degree do you have and so it's like, what certificates now in spiritual community? It's like, well, what certificates do you have? What legitimacy, what authority do you have? And it's like, wow, well, what if we just recognize, what about little kids that come in with some fabulous, incredible energy and they don't have
Right.
any,
Right.
doctorate or book or lineage. They just simply are what they are.
Right. Right.
And that's because they are being who they are before people tell them what they're not.
Right. Before people domesticate them and
Right.
mold them into who they think they should be.
Right. So that's something to consider this week. So I think for our little session, we'll do seeing through the veils of our ego's definitions of authority, right? To allow ourselves to access the authority within and to let that be. Honestly, at the end of the day, that's what our guiding force is to be.
Right.
Not what you say, not what I say, not what anybody else says, what comes from inside.
Yeah.
No matter what
Right.
that looks like. And that's really where we falter. That's really what it comes down to.
And that's where the real power is, especially given as we watch everything around us crumble and everything get different. It's the way we navigate, is coming back to that internal compass.
Yes.
That internal source of legitimacy, authority.
Yeah. So let's do set ourselves up for being able to see through the veils of the ego in terms of authority, to see the authority in ourselves, to allow it to know that we're worthy of it.
Right.
That no matter what it is, doesn't have to be a specific topic, that we are the authority in our experience. We have our expanded consciousness has it all. Right. And it's a matter of allowing ourselves to tap into that, to be devoted and committed to that, and then also to getting an idea and understanding some clarity on how to interact as part of the world while allowing that, and while committing to that, because that's a very different way of interacting with the world.
It is.
So let's start with that. So everybody take a deep breath, close your eyes, step out of separation, back into wholeness and oneness, as we hold ourselves at the vibration where that is our truth, that is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. Well, that was scattered because really my ego did not want to settle into that at all.
Right, right. Yeah, I ended up with a phrase that I just had to keep repeating, and that was, I simply um, exist through the authority of my authentic resonance.
Mhm.
And I had to really, I don't want to say dumb it down, but I had to really simplify it to get
Right.
to a place of uh, calm.
Mhm. Yeah, I went all over the place. It was like zoom, zoom, zoom. It's like squirrel. No, no, focus, focus, you know.
Right,
And and I was like, oh, look at that. This is a very uncomfortable button,
right,
obviously.
right,
At the same time, I recognize, oh, and my inner authority knows that. This is a very uncomfortable button. So yeah, so that's something. Some other stuff came to me, and I just have totally lost it. But I did relax into it probably the last couple of minutes, but it went very quickly. It was
right,
surprisingly. So yeah, that's the thing for this. Play with that right now. Play with that. Look at what you consider authority. Look at what you consider about your own authority.
right,
Journal about it, meditate on it, comment about it here, and start a conversation about it, because it's a it's a great it's a great fulcrum into what we're holding as beliefs that are limiting us, or
right,
putting hierarchies and stuff that we're not really acknowledging.
right. It's very provocative.
Yeah, it is. It is. So on that, we will let you go. This is Angela Coulter, and
Sarah Seek, Avignon.
signing off on this week's Living Ascension. We'll see you next time.